Welcome back to another episode of the Resinator's Conquest podcast. I'm your host, the Resinator. This episode's all about the Volley Action. You can find the PDF of all the rules on Para-Bellum's website, starting on page 38, the Volley Action. I'll set up a few examples to help show how to effectively take a volley action, from determining if they're in line of sight all the way up to rolling the actual hit dice. One last thing, if the enemy regiment threatens to block out the sun with the arrows they shoot during a volley action, just reply,
"Then we will fight in the shade."
The regiment trying to take a volley action has to not be engaged with an enemy regiment. So in this case right here, my crossbowmen are engaged with my Old Dominion Mori, and therefore they cannot take the volley action. The next thing that we're going to talk about for a volley action is line of sight. Part of line of sight is making sure that the enemy regiment is in the front arc of the regiment that is taking the volley action. So in this case, we have the crossbowmen, and they are right in front of the Mori, so they can definitely shoot at the Mori. Now let's go ahead and move the position of the crossbowmen and see if they still can. So if you move it like this, now we still have, if you take this bottom regiment and you actually do it kind of like corner to corner, I like to put the tape measure corner to corner, and that kind of shows you the line of sight. And everything in this side is going to be in the front arc. So this regiment is, and this stand all right here is still in line of sight of all of these. Oh, not all of them. So let's see. The second stand, it can still see these two, and the last stand can still see these two. So these two stands actually can't see this last stand here, just for line of sight rules. Now, if we were to turn the regiment all the way like this, they no longer can see the Mori, and so therefore they cannot shoot the Mori, because that's not in their front arc. This is actually going to be in their side arc. Same if they were, obviously like this. This is the back. They couldn't shoot. They have to do a reform action or maneuver so that they can actually have the Mori in their front arc. The next part of line of sight is to make sure the target regiment, the Mori here, are within the barrage range of the regiment trying to perform the volley action, which is going to be the crossbowmen. So we're going to measure this here, and for reference sake, so you know, the crossbowmen have a barrage of 24 inches, so they can shoot up to 24 inches. So in this case, we have the Mori that are going to be a little more than 15 inches away from the crossbowmen, and they're definitely within range, so they can definitely shoot at them. Now, if we were to move the Mori back outside of the 24 inches, all of a sudden now, the crossbowmen can actually draw line of sight to the Mori, so they can actually shoot them at this point. They would have to move forward first, and then they can take the volley action. So now we have another scenario where my crossbowmen are a little bit skewed. So we're going to take a measurement and make sure that each one of these stands is within the barrage range, and therefore within line of sight of the Mori over here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a measurement right from the middle of the stand here, and we're going to go straight over here to the Mori, and they're within 22 inches, so they're definitely within range, and so they can see. Then we'll take the second stand, the middle stand here, and they're just a little, about 23.5 inches to the front of this middle Mori, and therefore they can see them and shoot at them. And then we're going to check this last stand here. This last stand is actually outside of the 24 inches, and therefore that actually stand would not be able to shoot in this volley. But because you had the other two that are in range, you can actually make the shots. They just won't count towards the total shots that will be gained, and we'll talk about that later. Here we have a scenario where line of sight is dictated by size of different regiments. Brutes, in this case the Bone Golem, are considered level 2 for height. So we have a scenario here now where the crossbowmen can definitely see the brutes because they're within their front arc. They're definitely within range, 24 inches, but so they could definitely shoot at the Bone Golem. However, because the Bone Golems are level 2 and the Mori are level 1, the crossbowmen cannot actually see the Mori, and therefore cannot shoot at them. Now, if you have this reversed, And you have the Mori here in front, they're level 1, and now you have the level 2s of the Bone Golem behind them. The crossbowmen have their choice now. They can shoot at either the Mori or the Bone Golem, because the Bone Golem's a level 2, so they're definitely taller than, they're one taller than the Mori, so they can definitely see them. Now we're going to throw another thing into the mix. We have monsters. So in this case we have a Mountain Jotnar. So in this case I just stacked it all up. We have a level 1, level 1, level 1, level 2, and then now level 3. So monsters are considered level 3. So they are taller than obviously brutes and taller than infantry. And in this case the crossbowman would be able to shoot at any one of these targets here, of these enemy regiments. They can either shoot at the Mori, the Bone Golems, or the Mountain Jotnar. Now we have a scenario where the crossbowmen are trying to shoot at the Mori again, and there's a level 3 monster regiment and then a level 2 brute regiment that are in their way, but there's a small little gap here. We're going to check and see if each stand can actually shoot at the Mori. So again, you're going to draw a line of sight from the front middle of the each stand, and if you drew it and you're trying to get to this stand over here, it's going to clip part of this Bone Golem stand, so it actually can't shoot at the Mori. But if you take the middle one definitely, the middle one definitely has line of sight right to these stands here. So now we're going to do this one here, and if you do it, it's going to actually clip the edge of the monster stand, and therefore it can't shoot. So in this case, only the middle stand would contribute shots, and again we'll get to that in a little bit. These kind of scenarios can be set up with either enemy regiments in the way, and like in this case, or in case like maybe this is a building and then an enemy regiment, or these are both buildings and there's a little alleyway between the buildings. After you know that the regiment that is trying to perform the volley is in line of sight of the enemy regiment, next you need to check for effective range. The effective range is basically half of your overall total range of the regiment. In this case, we're talking about the crossbowmen, who have a total of 24 inches for their range, for barrage range. In this scenario, we have the crossbowmen within effective range because they're within 12 inches, which is half of their overall barrage range, and therefore they will get a +1 to their barrage characteristic when making the volley action against the Mori. If the Mori were moved back a little bit outside of the 12 inches, they would no longer be within effective range and no longer gain that bonus of +1. In this scenario, we have the crossbowmen in a slightly staggered formation, and we're going to check and see if each stand is in effective range or not. So again, we're always checking from the center, and we're going to measure from the center all the way to the enemy regiment, and we're looking, and he's within 12 inches, this first stand. Go to the second stand, and he is just outside that, and the third stand is going to obviously be even further away, so he's going to be farther away. So when you're actually counting up the number of hits and doing the actual volley roll, this stand here will get a +1 to their barrage, but the other two stands will not. Before we move on to determining the number of shots we're going to have to roll, you have to determine if you're shooting into one or multiple arcs of the enemy regiment. So in this case, we have the Mori kind of at a skewed angle. And if you look at it, we will always kind of measure from corner to corner to tell, the arcs. And if you look at it, we're going halfway here. This is going to be their side arc, that's going to be their front arc. And these two stands actually are going to be in their Mori's side arc, while this stand is going to be shooting into the front arc. And that matters for special rules like shields and morale tests and other things like that. So you need to know which kind of arc you're shooting into. In this case, if we were to put it like this, the crossbowman will be shooting right into the side arc of the Mori. And obviously, if we were going like this, in this scenario, the crossbowman will be shooting it into the back arc of the Mori. Now moving on to determining the number of shots, which will be the dice, how many dice you'll roll in the volley action. In this scenario, we have the crossbowmen within effective range, within 12 inches of the Mori. They would get the +1 to their barrage. The crossbowmen have a natural barrage of 4, so that would be +1 would be 5. So that would be 5 dice per stand, and that would be how many dice? 15 dice you'd roll. And you'd roll that, and let's actually just do the roll real quick, and then we compare it to the volley characteristic of the crossbowman, which is 2, and you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4 hits. Then the Mori would roll their defense roll against their either defense or evasion characteristic and determine if they got wounds or not. Now you have the crossbowmen where they're trying to do a volley action against the Mori that are outside of the effective range, so they no longer get the +1 bonus to their barrage. So their natural barrage is going to be 4, so that would be they would have 4 dice per stand in order to shoot at. Now let's just change this a little bit, and let's move, if we move it forward like this a little bit, so you'll see now, if we were to measure from the middle here, let's move it a little bit more forward. So now you have the first stand here is in effective range, and the other two are outside of effective range. You'd add an extra one to that one stand, and then you would have actually 13 dice instead of 12 dice. And if you were to push it just a little bit further, and let's say the middle stand was also within effective range, but the last stand was outside of effective range, then this one stand would have 5 as well because you get the +1 bonus. So there's a little bit that can happen depending on if the alignment of all of your regiments. Now we're going to go back to this scenario where only the middle stand had a line of sight to the Mori. But because they're so close, they're definitely within effective range. So in this case, when determining the number of shots, they would actually get 5 shots. Some of the last things I want to say about the volley action is that there are a lot of special rules that affect the actual volley action, like shields, and that just depending on which arc you're firing into. Also, there are some special rules that actually make the volley action incur a morale test, because normally a volley action doesn't incur any kind of morale test. But there are some kind of special rules, especially I've seen in the 100 Kingdoms and in the Wadroon, where you can actually get the regiments to incur the morale checks after they have done damage in a volley action. So you have to pay attention to the special rules and when you're doing volley actions. From the start of my Conquest journey, I didn't really use the volley regiments that often. I didn't see how useful they'd be in real combat. To me, not being able to have that morale check afterwards was kind of devastating. So I thought, if I have a lot of melee in my army, that I can just go up there, run into the enemy regiments, smash them, hit them as hard as I can with my melee regiments, and then have them incur, like the double wounds basically because of the morale checks. Well, I ended up going up against a couple players that used a lot of heavy volley regiments, especially 100 Kingdoms. So it was funny, he was doing 100 Kingdoms versus 100 Kingdoms a lot of times, but he would use a lot of the longbowmen and then some crossbowmen and other the militia bowmen. And he would devastate some of my units before I'd even get anywhere close to him. And it became a problem, and I started realizing how good volley units can be. So don't underestimate some of these volley regiments. They can be really strong, they can be really powerful, and they can do a lot of damage, especially if you place them up on high pieces of terrain, especially if you even garrison them. Okay, the garrison rules for volley is that the regiment that's in a garrison has a 360-degree front arc, so you can shoot anywhere, any direction. And then normally you're getting at least +1 bonus to your defense while you're in the garrison. So it's really nice to be in a garrison, especially if it's like a tower and you're up tall, or if you're on top of some hills, so you can make sure you can shoot and see over some maybe brute size cavalry or brutes that are kind of charging the field. Or even monsters to shoot over them. So it'll give you some good range. One of the really cool things about the volley action in Last Argument of Kings is that you can shoot into melee. So if you have one of your regiments engaged with an enemy regiment, you can shoot right into there and hit those enemies as long as you can see them. So that may be something that, like a strategy you can use, is use a weak infantry unit in order to go up there and slow down a brute size or even a monster size enemy regiment and then shoot at it because they're taller. So you can see right over your guys and see into the brutes or monsters and shoot at it without any kind of penalties. You know, that could be a good strategy to slow down those brutes and maybe even cavalry that are moving really fast across the field. Especially those ones that move like 8 inches, and then, you know, if they double move, that's 16 inches they're moving across the field. Or even if they charge. So that's an 8-inch move, and then they have up to a 14-inch charge, because the die roll plus their movement, which is 6 max, plus 8, which is 14 inches. And then if they actually have the glorious charge, I believe it's glorious charge, they get the plus 2. So that's actually 16 inches they can charge on top of their 8-inch movement, which is 24 inches technically they can go in one turn. So slow them down in any way possible. Another bit of advice is to protect those volley regiments, because usually they're a little bit weaker on the defense. And so what I like to do is kind of keep a melee regiment right behind my volley regiment, and then once they get too close to the enemy, I'll push the melee regiment right in front of my volley regiment to protect them, and then, you know, usually charge them or just use them as a kind of a shield to protect my volley regiments. Well, that's about it for this episode. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Resinator's Conquest podcast. This episode is all about the volley action. The next episode, well, you're just going to have to wait.
You had to say, fight in the shade.